Yes, we are back here on Issues and Answers Friday, straight out of the cannon. With me, Scott Cannon. It is 6:46 in the PM here on Friday, April the 26th, 2024. The future is here. The future is now. All right, folks, as you heard in the intro, the Supreme Court is going to debate whether cities can punish people who are homeless. Think about that. They are going to punish people for not having a home. The most significant case in decades on homelessness has reached the Supreme Court as record numbers of people in America are without a permanent place to live. Now, mind you, in the last segment, I just told you it would cost $20 billion to end homelessness permanently in the United States. And we just sent $60 billion to Israel. No, $60 billion to Ukraine. $26 billion to Israel. And $8 billion basically to Taiwan. And we sent some money to Gaza. We're going to help them be bombed. We're going to sponsor their genocide, the genocide of their people, and then throw them a few turkey sandwiches. A record amount of people in America are homeless. The justices will consider a challenge to rulings from a California-based appeals court that found punishing people for sleeping outside when shelter space is lacking amounts to unconstitutional, cruel, and unusual punishment. You think? You think punishing people who already are homeless isn't cruel? Isn't unusual? A political cross-section of officials in the West and California, home to nearly 1/3 of the nation's homeless population, argue those decisions have restricted them from common sense measures intended to keep homeless encampments from taking over the public parks and sidewalks. Advocacy groups say the decisions provide essential legal protections, especially with an increasing number of people who are forced to sleep outdoors as the cost of housing soars. I talk about this quite a bit here on the show. We, as American laborers, everybody who, I guess, listen to the show, who has some sort of a job, have been exploited for many, many decades. Just how exploited? In the 1960s. In the 1960s, you could take care of a family on a minimum wage salary. In 1973, when real wages were at their peak, you could take care of a family of 3 on a minimum wage salary. And now, in 2024, you cannot afford to live as a single person in a single apartment in 90% of the counties in America. You get all these older people talking about people don't want to work. 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 No, people don't want to work for slave wages. They paying $10 an hour. They paying $12 an hour. You do know that if the minimum wage kept pace with inflation and productivity, which it's supposed to be, that's how Roosevelt designed it, to keep pace with productivity and inflation, it would be $24. That's what the minimum wage is supposed to be, $5. That's the equivalent of what people who were working for minimum wage 50 years ago were making. That's why they could take care of a family of 3 on a minimum wage salary. That's why people could work at the Dairy Queen and pay their college tuition for the whole year. They could work at Dairy Queen for a summer and buy a brand new car. You were making the equivalent of $24 an hour, genius. Real wages have plummeted to the point where people think making $10 an hour or $12 an hour is some huge thing. Oh, whoa, that's $5 over the minimum wage. The minimum wage is slavery. And then we have a situation in where the banks have bought up all of the housing stock here in America, especially in larger cities. And so now people can't afford to live in most major cities in the country. A political cross-section of officials in the West and California, home to nearly a third of the nation's population, argue those decisions have restricted them from common sense measures intended to keep homeless encampments from taking over public parks and sidewalks. Advocacy groups say the decision provides essential legal protections, especially with an increasing number of people being forced to sleep outdoors as the cost of housing soars, as I talked about. The case before the Supreme Court comes from Grants Pass, a small city nestled in the mountains of southern Oregon, where rents are rising and there is just one overnight shelter for adults. As a growing number of tents clustered in its parks, the city banned camping and set a $295 fine for people who are sleeping there. So where are they supposed to sleep? A ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals largely blocked the camping ban under its finding that it is unconstitutional to punish people for sleeping outside when there is not adequate shelter space. Grants Pass appealed to the Supreme Court, arguing that the ruling left it few good options. The city is also challenging a 2018 decision known as Martin versus Boise that first barred camping bans when shelter space is lacking. It was issued by the San Francisco-based Ninth Circuit and applies to the 9 western states in its jurisdiction. The Supreme Court declined to take up a different challenge to the ruling before the solidification of its current conservative majority. 2 of 4 states with the country's largest homeless populations, Washington and California, are in the West. Officials in cities such as Los Angeles and San Francisco say that they do not want to punish people solely because they are forced to sleep outside, but that cities need power to keep the growing encampments in check. San Francisco says it has been blocked from enforcing camping regulations because the city does not have enough shelter space for its full homeless population, something it estimates would cost $1.5 billion to provide. That is bull crap. Several cities and Democratic California Governor Gavin Newsom urged the High Court to keep some legal protections in place when reining in overreach by lower courts. The Martin versus Boise ruling allows cities to regulate and sweep encampments, but not enforce total bans in communities without enough beds and shelters. And here we are. The dystopia furthers. The dystopia furthers. We sent the jobs overseas. We sent our manufacturing base overseas so that the rich could get richer. We drove down wages so that people can't afford to live. And then we punish people for being homeless. And what do we do when we punish people for being homeless? We throw them in prison. People who become repeat offenders, they end up in prison. They end up hooked on drugs. They end up committing crimes. And now the prison industrial complex is fed. You know, I say this and I don't take this lightly. The people who run our country are the most evil people on the planet. That is a fact. They are worse than Vladimir Putin. They are worse than Xi Jinping. The rest of the world sees us as the villains now. You guys do know this, right? The rest of the world sees our government. Hell, many people have long seen it. Martin Luther King, in a speech I played a few weeks ago, called the United States government the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. This was in 1968. And he was assassinated no, that was the mountaintop. He was assassinated the next year. Greatest purveyor of violence in the world. This is just another part of that reason that the world sees it this way. This is why I cover stuff like the Forbes list that I covered a few weeks ago. We are seeing the wealthy make records amount of money and hoard records amount of wealth, while people are being forced to sleep outside and being criminalized for sleeping outside because they can't afford housing, because the banks own all the houses. We have millions of empty houses in America. And as the report talked about, shout out to WeOn News from India. Unfortunately, the American media is so corrupt and owned by billionaires, I have to look to foreign media. Cities have tried housing first as a way to dealing with homeless people. And guess what? Giving homeless people homes works. It works. It keeps crime down. People are often able to get a job, get clean, get sober, have some place to take a shower once a day or a few times a week. Magically, that works. Which is something that other countries do regularly. In Western Europe, you won't see homeless people all over there hanging out in the streets. And again, all of this is so that the elites who run our society can continue to lord over us and collect records amount of wealth. This is horrific when you talk about how so much of the problems in our country intersect. The military industrial complex, the prison industrial complex, the corporate industrial complex, they make you poor. They put you in the streets. You get desperate. You get hooked on drugs or alcohol. You commit a crime. They send you to prison. They get paid on both of that. They get paid either way. Just an absolute tragic situation. Hopefully the Supreme Court will do the right thing. The humane thing, we can't really depend on Clarence Thomas, can we? And Samuel Alito and people like these people, usually Amy Coney Barrett, most of these people to do the right thing in most cases. Hopefully they will. But it's important to understand what we're up against. It's one of the reasons why I do this show, so that the people listening here in the region, 219 region, East Chicago, Gary, Hammond, South Side of Chicago, know what the hell we're dealing with. Your neighbor is not the person who is responsible for whatever suffering you have. It is not the black kids, the little black kids with their rap music and their pants hanging down. They're not the reason you're in the situation you're in. They are victims. Of the corporate state. They were created by the corporate state. And the corporate media. All right, folks. On the lighter note, happy happies. We're going to get into it when we come back.